St. Luke is talking about leprosy, and so is the prophet Elisha in the second book of Kings. A couple of things to note. They're not talking about leprosy the way we know it, like Molokai leprosy, Hansen's disease. It is basically any kind of skin disease. I mean, shingles would have been considered leprosy in those days, or a severe rash, or any other number of conditions, boils or whatever, all would have been considered leprosy. And leprosy was not just a physical issue. It was a social issue, because if you had any of those conditions, nobody could get near you, and nobody could touch you, including your family, or they became ritually unclean. And if they had to go through the streets, they had to shout out, "Unclean, unclean," so people would not get near them. So they were, when you came down with anything like that, you were not just physically in difficulty, you were in difficulty because you had no social life at all, you had no family life at all your placement in the community was gone, lost for good. You were alone. And the only people you could associate with were other lepers. So there was a little group of lepers. How would we think of them today? A group of street people, under the freeway. A group like that. Nobody touched them, nobody has anything to do with them, everybody's a little afraid of them. That kind of group. And you notice they stood at a distance from Jesus because they couldn't get close. They were forbidden to get close. And shouted at him, "Jesus, have mercy on us. Have pity on us." And Jesus did. But there's a few things about this. Number one is they had to have faith in order to make the shouting out in the first place. I mean, if they'd have just kept quiet and said, "Ooh, Jesus is going by, big crowd, let it go," he'd have walked right by. It's their faith, and Jesus says it at the end, as he says it in almost all his all his healing stories. It's your faith has saved you. Your faith has made you whole. It's your faith that has done this. They had faith that he could cleanse them. And so when he didn't even go over and touch them or anything, he just said, "Go show yourselves to the priest that you're cured." And they took his word for it and went off and were cured, were healed, were restored to their families, were restored to their communities. Their dignity was restored, not just their health. And then Jesus said, nobody bothered to give thanks from among the people of Israel. The only one that came back was this hated Samaritan. The people didn't like Samaritans. They were outcasts. They were the people that were had made peace with the enemy while the rest of Israel was thrown out into captivity. They stayed home, intermarried, and got along with the enemy. Kind of like the Petain government in World War II. So they were not appreciated. They were not viewed with any kind of favorable way at all, these Samaritans. And who was the one that came back? A Samaritan. Elisha, in the first reading also, who was the one that was cured? A Syrian. There were a lot of lepers in Israel. Who was cured? The Syrian. God does not have any religious boundaries. God does not have any ethnic boundaries. No individual people can say, "You're ours." God is the God of all. Now, Jesus expected them to come back and offer praise to God. Not to him personally so much, but offer praise to God, to offer thanks for what God has done for them. But 9 of them were so happy about themselves, they never got beyond themselves. And aren't we doing great? Isn't this wonderful? They never stopped to think, where'd this come from? And should not we pay attention? Should not we give thanks? We all have our own version of leprosy called sin. And we reach out, hopefully, in faith to the one who can free us from that leprosy, the one who can free us from that sin. We reach out in faith to Jesus. But if we don't call out to him, he can walk by us too. We need to call out in faith. It doesn't happen automatically. We call on him in prayer. We call on him for forgiveness. We call on him for pity. We call on him for healing. We call on him for cleansing, for freedom from that which oppresses us, the sin which we carry, the burdens which weigh us down, the guilt that sometimes enervates us. And the Lord does hear our prayer, and the Lord will and does heal us and forgive us. Do we then remember to give thanks? Do we then remember to turn to him and offer thanks? To my way of thinking, that's primarily what our prayer ought to be. Not give me or I need, but thank you. That's what we do here on Sunday. That's what we're about here. Not everybody knows what we're about here, frankly. But what we are about is Eucharist. We are about to give thanks. If you listen to the words of the prayers, you'll hear the word thanks in there very often. It is right that we give him thanks. We are here to give thanks for all that God has done for us, for the grace his presence is in our life, for the healing he has brought us from our sinfulness and our waywardness. From all the blessings we have in life, we come to give thanks. And we need to give thanks in our personal prayer as well. We can go through, any one of us can go through 10 things at the end of the day that we're grateful for. And simply say to God, thank you for this gift. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for the evidence of your love. And reach out to him in faith and gratitude. If the Samaritans can do it, we can do it. If the Syrians can do it, we can do it, even though we're part of the people of God.